All right, let's talk about the election results. Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Nate the Lawyer. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, don't forget to like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the channel if you like what you hear. Let's get into it. The state of Texas is suing Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And I'm just going to say it. It's one of the worst and probably one of the dumbest lawsuits I think I've ever read. It's really, really that bad. And I'll go into exactly why I believe this lawsuit is getting tossed. So Texas has filed suit in the federal courts. And since Texas as a state is suing another state, that is the fastest you can get up to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction over disputes between states. Now, the last case that I actually remember where two states actually fought each other out at the Supreme Court was New York v. New Jersey over Ellis Island, because it was a border dispute. And that's usually where you'll see the Supreme Court get involved, when you have disputes on, where a state's border is versus another border. And they'll take that case on original jurisdiction, meaning the Supreme Court in that instance acts as a trial court. They'll hear their evidence, hear the witnesses, and then make a decision. So the Texas Attorney General essentially is saying, well, we looked at Pennsylvania law, and we've interpreted that the Pennsylvania authorities didn't follow Pennsylvania law. Understand what's going on. They're looking into Georgia and saying the people in Georgia, the officials, the law enforcement, the governor, the people who wrote the laws, the people who are in charge of interpreting their own laws, they're wrong. And we want the Supreme Court to overturn the results in Georgia because we in Texas believe they're interpreting and enforcing their laws wrong. Now, that's wild. It's so fundamental in American law that states have sovereignty. Now, what do I mean by that? Each state itself has its own sovereignty. They, write their own laws, they interpret their own laws, and they are the masters of their domain. Right? Now, each state, each one of our states in the United States, 50, each one of the 50 states, gives up a piece of that sovereignty to the federal government. And the way we do that is that we say, okay, here's the Constitution, and we're going to give you the powers listed in the Constitution. Now, if it's not listed there, we retain them. So when you read through the Constitution, it's a document that gives the federal government authority, because it actually takes that authority from the people and the states and says, okay, we're going to give up that commerce, war, making money, those things. We're giving up our sovereignty to do those things to the federal government, so it can do that on all our behalves. That's why you'll hear a lot of people say, it's a limited government. The federal government is the Constitution is a limiting document. That's what people generally mean. The pieces of sovereignty that states have given up, that's listed in the Constitution and its amendments. But now, if it's not in that document, if the states haven't given that sovereignty over to the federal government in those limited areas, then the states retain all the other authority. This principle that I'm discussing with you now is enumerated within the Constitution in the 10th Amendment, which reads, "The power not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, is reserved to the states respectively or to the people." So this is that principle, that the states themselves are sovereign and delegate powers to the federal government. And whatever it's not delegated, the states have it. So this turns us to the current legal action from Texas. So what is Texas essentially asking for? Well, they're asking the U.S. Supreme Court to look into states that have passed election laws and to tell states that because you passed this law and we don't believe you're following it the way it was passed, we are going to overturn your election. But the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to go into a state and tell it how to enforce its own laws, unless the way they're enforcing it violates some principle of the Constitution. And this is where I think a lot of both law students and lay people don't understand the workings of the federal court system. So the Supreme Court can void or say a state law is invalid if it violates the federal Constitution. So, for instance, in the recent case with New York, where they had an executive order that didn't allow churches to have more than 10 people in the church, the Supreme Court said, well, that law or that executive order violated the U.S. Constitution. And since it violates the U.S. Constitution, then that law is no good. Simple enough, right? And it violated the First Amendment. But the caveat to this is that if the state passes a law that doesn't violate the federal Constitution and that doesn't raise any federal issues, then the Supreme Court is powerless to do anything about that state law. So let's say a state passes a law that says plastic bags are illegal. Like here in New York City. In New York City, right now you can't, if you go to a supermarket, they have to charge you for like 5 cents for a plastic bag. They passed an ordinance. If someone sued in federal court and said, hey, we want you to overturn the bag law, right? The bag law, the first thing they'll say is, well, how is them banning plastic bags violate your constitutional rights? Well, it doesn't allow me to buy a bag. Well, show me in the Constitution where you have the right to buy plastic bags. And it's going to say you don't have the right to buy plastic bags. And the court's going to say, well, we can't hear this case because that state is sovereign and they can pass whatever laws they want. And if you want to change them and you live there, then vote the people out or you can move, right? Or you can move. So that is the check on federal power, is that it's limited. It's limited in scope. This is where this case, I think, falls apart. Because when it comes to the election laws, those election laws are written in a way where the state governments write their own laws and say, this is the way we're going to do it. The Constitution gives the states and state legislatures the ability to make their own election laws. So let's look at Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2. And this is the method of selecting electors for president. And it says here, quote, each state shall appoint in a manner as the state legislature thereof may direct. It makes it very, very, very clear that it is the state and the state legislatures who determine the manner in which their electors are picked. They don't have to have a vote. They can just say, well, you know, we're going to pick electors for the Democrats all the time, or we're going to pick electors for the Republicans all the time. They can, it leaves it open, right? The Constitution is clear. It's the state legislature who determines the manner in which these. Now, some people will say, well, can you have a constitutional issue in this particular instance? And you can. Let's say, for instance, in picking electors, and the state says, okay, we're going to allow the people to choose electors, and we're going to hold a vote. And whoever wins the vote, that's who gets the electors. But they say no black people can vote in the election, which was happening in a lot of southern states. That would violate the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. So that law would be invalid because the 14th Amendment demands equal protection. You can't segregate who can vote and who can't vote based on race. So the manner in which you're doing it violates the federal Constitution, and then they can say, well, that law is invalid. You can't do it that way. But now if you say, well, we're going to do mail-in ballots, and that's the way we're going to do it, then now the federal government can't say, well, you can't do mail-in ballots. How does a state offering mail-in ballots violate the Constitution? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't say you can't offer mail-in ballots. It doesn't invoke something like equal protection. It just says you can do whatever way you want. If you want to do mail-in, you can do it mail-in. And states like Oregon have been doing mail-in ballots for, how many years now? They do all mail-in ballots. So the method is essentially the state legislature's prerogative. And now in these states, the states that are being sued, their legislatures have said, this is the way we're going to do it. They've passed laws. Now, who interprets their laws? Who interprets the state's laws? Well, it's going to be the state Supreme Court. The federal courts can't interpret state law. The final say in what state law means is the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court say, this is how we interpret the state law to be. The Supreme Court can't say, well, you know, you interpreted that state law to mean X. We believe it actually means Y, so we're going to overrule your interpretation of state law. That's just not how it works. That is, the Supreme Court does not have that authority. And that's essentially what Texas is asking the court to do now. Hey, here is what the state law says. Here is what they did. And we believe that they are interpreting their laws wrong. I think the only way they could actually legitimately do this is to go into a state like Georgia and file cases with the Georgia court system and say, well, hey, we believe the enforcement and the interpretation of this law is wrong, and see what the Georgia court system says, because they are the final say in what their state law means. Anyone who's telling you that this Texas lawsuit is in anyway, anyway, um, valid, you know, I'm going to respectfully disagree and honestly believe they're grasping at straws. This is not any type of legitimate lawsuit at the federal level. It just is not. It's laughable how bad it is. It's honestly laughable how bad it is. And I think most people, if you understand how our legal system works here in the United States, I don't think there's any way that you can think that this case has any legitimate chance. It just doesn't. Now I'm going to be on with Viva and Barnes and on Thursday, I believe it is, and we'll speak about this. The simple fact is they're going into Georgia, into Pennsylvania, and saying you're interpreting your laws the wrong way. You're enforcing your laws the wrong way. Now, I think also too, we have to just call it what it is. This is a Republican state who voted for Trump, trying to overturn the states that voted for Joe Biden. And we're talking about specifically the swing states. Now, people are going to say there was election fraud, evidence of fraud. None has actually been proven. Affidavits. I've been hearing affidavits. We got an affidavit that Martians, changed ballot boxes, and people look and say, "Where's the evidence of them with the Martians?" And there's no evidence. There's no affidavit. There's an affidavit. Here's an affidavit. I got millions of affidavits. We got affidavits, and all the affidavits have turned out to be bullshit. I'm sorry. I know there are some of you who want President Trump to win. But let's just call it. The affidavits, the millions and mountains of affidavits, the so-called evidence, has been bullshit. And it's interesting because when I argue with my Republican counterparts and ask them, well, what evidence have you found? We found this, we found that. And I'm like, okay, let me see it. Oh, there's really no evidence. Oh, well, we believe this is wrong. Oh, we think this happened. Well, thinking and believing is not evidence, right? You got to show me. And let's not forget about the embarrassment that these hearings have had, right? You saw it what Rudy Giuliani was going through. It was embarrassing. And I'm surprised no one's asked the question. If voter fraud is so widespread, it's not just in Democratic states, right? If this was just Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which are predominantly Democratic states, then you can make the argument that, hey, Democrats are corrupt. But it's Georgia. Georgia is not a blue state. The governor is a Trump supporter. The Secretary of State is a Trump supporter. That's a ruby red state. So in 2016, Trump won Michigan by a very narrow margin, right? One thing, like for instance, in Wayne County, Trump got a lot more votes than expected. And it was kind of surprising. It was like, well, why did he get so many more votes in a predominantly Democratic county? Now, you can, maybe there's more people, maybe some of the dynamics would change. But in 2016, Michigan, which is, especially Wayne County, which is heavily Democrat, the whole state flipped for Trump. And, in a county like Wayne County, which is a heavily Democratic county, Trump got more votes than Republican did just 4 years ago, right? About like, I think 15,000 more votes in Wayne County. So if you scratch your head, you'll say, well, why would he get, so many more votes? But then here's the Detroit Free Press in 2016 after Election Day. And it says Detroit election woes, 782 more votes than voters. So in 2016, here it is right here on the screen for you. You had actual evidence of some irregularity, right? Did you hear about this? Was there a stink made about this? Were people suing in federal court because of this, saying Trump did not win? If it's a fraud, right? If it's a fraud and it's wrong, then there should have been a stink then. Hey, what happened? Why are there more votes than voters? That just doesn't make any sense. And remember, this is not 2020. This is not this year. This was when President Trump won. So now just imagine if you found something like this year. We'd be up in arms. There'd be a whole problem. But you haven't found anything like this year, right? You have found nothing like this. You haven't even found anything close to this. So this is what I'm talking about. We want to separate the political garbage from the facts on the ground. And the facts on the ground are that it's likely that Joe Biden is going to be sworn in on January 20th. And in about 6 days, when the Electoral College meets, this game is going to be over. The game is going to be over. And I think this is just some last dash by Republicans in Texas and Louisiana and all these other states that are joining this lawsuit to just we support the president at the end of the day, but we know he's going to lose. So, it is what it is. But, if anybody else is telling you that this lawsuit is legitimate, if this lawsuit has legs, if this thing has standing, I'm just going to tell you, I respectfully disagree with them. Let me know your comments below. This is just my thoughts on what's going on and this Supreme Court filing from Texas. I may be wrong. Me and Uncivil Law are going to talk about it tonight at 9 o'clock on his channel. We do our weekly show, Uncivilized. And, I don't know his thoughts on it, but my thoughts are that this is bullshit. And it is a bullshit lawsuit. So we'll see. If you like what you heard, let me know how you feel. My name is Nate, lawyer, YouTuber. I'm out. Peace.